Welcome into Bucs Insider, coming to you from the Bucs studio, presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, staff writer Bree Dix, and we are here to cover another week of Bucs news. And man, it's a fun one after that win. Yeah. What a way to start the season. I just can't get over how perfect that felt. Outside of some injuries, which we will get into because that has definitely turned into a big storyline. Yeah. But for now, let's focus on the positives of that win. It was so much fun. First, I mean, Liam Coen, he was one of the big storylines coming in. We wanted to see what was this offense going to look like. We'd heard a lot about it, but preseason, you don't unveil everything, right? And I have to imagine when you get a new offensive coordinator, this was just about as good as you could hope for in so many ways. I mean, you have the second most points in week 1, scored on 7 of 8 non-kneel down drives, and I mean, that many points. They didn't score over 30 until week 9 last season. Wow. So that's already just an incredible amount of points and stats. And that is, if you're able to put up those kind of points, you're going to win a lot. That's a pretty decent amount of points to go. And I love seeing some of the stuff we'd wanted to learn about his offense, right? Yes, there was a lot of 11 personnel, right? We'd heard he loves to play mainly that one tight end. Yep. Run game, huge, another storyline we focused a ton on. There were still aspects I know they're trying to work on and some kinks in terms of especially yards per run, on Rashad's and Bucky's was a little higher because he gets a 31-yard run. Sure. But you saw a lot of variety in it, which I think was really great to see. And third down, I mean, Chris Godwin, the god of third down. That man, I think, I'm imagining that's what Liam Coen's playbook says for third down is find Chris Godwin. Because he was, and they were great on third down, which was incredible. But, I mean, there were so many different people producing things. Week 1, they were the only team to have 4 different skill players get 60-plus yards from scrimmage. You're throwing out stats I didn't even know. Look at all these stats. I'm usually the stats guy. I know, I'm trying, man. After all these years, on my 10th season, you've rubbed off on me. One of just 2 teams to have 3 different players haul in a receiving touchdown. So it was just such an incredible way to see this kickoff of so many people getting involved. You saw some variety in the run game. You saw the offensive line creating some holes. To me, it checked all the boxes of what you wanted to see. You mentioned third downs. They were 9 of 13, which is about 62%. 4th best game we've ever had in that category. And to me, what it said was, how many times did we hear during the offseason when Liam Coen was at the podium, we want to have answers. We want to have answers for whatever we see. We want Baker to have answers. If he thinks it's going to be zone and then he sees it's man, we have an answer for that. That showed up to me on third downs. Yeah. Because you don't know what you're going to get, but to convert that many third downs means they had answers for what they saw. Yeah, and Chris Godwin being back in the slot more, we see that that brings out kind of the best Chris Godwin, that's where he's got his ability to do everything that he wants. I might be talking about that a little bit later in the fantasy segment. Ooh, interesting. Look at that teaser. Look at you know how to be doing a tease here. And of course, part of all that success on the offense was not just Liam Coen, but Baker Mayfield having himself a game.
League best performance, led the NFL in passer rating and passing touchdowns, was named the FedEx Air Player of the Week, completed 24 of 30 passes, had 4 touchdowns, and had a passer rating of 146.4. And there were 2 drives back-to-back where he completed all 8 attempts. But I think you just saw the poise, the command, and just him having fun. And he said that over and over. And I love they said on the broadcast, but they said this is just a special unit and it's tangible. And I think you saw that with Baker Mayfield, whether it was him scrambling, the first down celebration, but also just some of the sidearm throws he had. But he had full command and got the ball where he needed to go, was smart, was accurate. And then Chris Godwin, as you said, god of third down, had himself a day. 7 of his 8 catches resulted in a first down and 4 were third down conversions. Physical at the top routes, quick out of breaks, and just kind of had that ability over the middle of the field on the outbreakers, what kind of became the catalyst. And then Mike Evans, 2 touchdown day. And it's funny because I think we get to the point where you're so accustomed to him making these big plays that it's almost, it's a play. But his first touchdown, my God, jaw dropped. The Commanders' DB was all over him, held him, physical at the line, and he still manages to work over the top, haul in the catch on the go route. But I think, too, it's the feel and the timing and the chemistry between Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans in his second year of knowing where to put the ball when Evans is in the one-on-one, whether it's the back shoulder, inside, outside, and you're seeing the fruition of that. And like you mentioned, them being in 11 personnel, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, they're going to have to do more in the run game. And I think you saw that especially with Godwin and some of what we talked about spurring Bucky Irving's 31-yard run. He kind of had the the block on the safety to kind of extend that run lane for him. So just overall, I think those three came up really, really big against the Commanders.
20 passes thrown to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White, who are obviously the top 3 pass catchers on this team. 19 completed.
Wow.
The thought that came into my mind regarding Baker during that game, you've heard the phrase before, he can make every throw. That just popped into my mind towards the end of that game, because Baker can make every throw.
He was making every throw.
Yeah.
I mean,
all levels.
those deep outs are hard.
Yeah.
That's a long pass considering how wide the field is. The corner routes, how many times did he throw that corner, that flag route? The shallow outs where the receiver only has like a step of separation, you have to put it right here. He can make every throw.
It's incredible. Now, we've talked a lot about the offense for good reason, but the defense was, of course, a very big story coming out of that game for many reasons. I felt like the three of us were maybe going to have to suit up at one point. There were injuries going into the game that we already knew about, that guys were going to have to step up, and then, of course, it ended up being another guy stepping up and another guy stepping up. But what stood out to you, Scott, about a lot of these defensive guys and the way they had to change some of these rotations and play some guys in places they hadn't before?
Oh, so you guys get to talk about the offense that was
amazing,
practically perfect.
And
I get
Scott,
to talk
you
about
get
the
the injury?
defense,
Yep.
which was like the walking wounded.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
About right.
so they started. They went into the game without Logan Hall and Kalijah Cansey and Ernest Brown, who went on injury reserve. So 3 of the 6 that they originally kept for the 53-man roster on the defensive line got hurt in practice between the cut down to 53 and the game, which is pretty ridiculous.
Yep.
So they had to rely on Ben Stilley, who they just signed from Arizona's practice squad, and C.J. Brewer and Mike Green, who they called up from the practice squad. And then, of course, Vita Vea and Greg Gaines and Will Golston played more than they normally would have. And Greg Gaines was playing out of position because he's your backup nose tackle, and now he's playing like 3 techniques. So great job by those guys because, yes, Jaden Daniels, who's electric in the open field, ran for 88 yards, but their running backs only ran for 50 yards. And so they did a pretty good job in run defense, and that was the key. And there was a decent amount of pressure. So that was good. But then you got the problems on the front end, and then during the game, everybody knows this by now, I'm not sharing any new news or anything, but Zion McCollum gets a concussion, so Bryce Hall comes in. In the meantime, Josh Hayes, who's one of the other reserves, hurts his ankle on a punt return, and then at halftime, because you're down to 2 corners now, because Tyreek Funderburk was inactive because he was still overcoming his preseason injury. At halftime, Coach Bowles and Coach Ross go up to Christian Izien, who's a safety, has played slot corner, but hasn't played outside corner since sophomore in high school, and say, hey, you're the next man in if somebody goes down. And then almost immediately in the second half, Bryce Hall, now I don't mean to make this levity about this because that was a bad injury, and the poor guy's out for the season now. But now, so now you're in, Christian, you're in, and he did a great job.
He really did.
He had a really important third down breakup on the sideline, and otherwise you didn't hear about him, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
So now going into the next game, that's going to be an issue because Antoine Winfield also got hurt, like on the second to last play of the game. He's your all-pro safety and one of your most indispensable defenders, and he's probably not going to be available. So now Christian Izien is preparing to play safety.
This guy's become just the Swiss Army knife of this defense.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, it's incredible. So speaking of all that, it's a good time to talk about the injury report, as sad as it may be.
Yes.
We
a lot of names on this list this week.
We are shooting this on a Thursday morning, so we only have 1 injury report so far. There will be 2 more to go. So based on this first one, what we've heard in press conferences, tell us kind of the state of things on that injury report.
So Kalijah Cansey and Antoine Winfield didn't practice on Wednesday. They probably are not likely to play against the Detroit Lions. Zion McCollum will be interesting to watch to see how he progresses in the concussion protocol. He practiced in a limited fashion on Wednesday, as did Logan Hall on the defensive line. So both of them potentially have a shot. And then also, not fun, Luke Gedeke showed up on the report on Wednesday with a concussion as well. So now there will be a monitoring of him and see how he progresses in the concussion protocol to see if they're both eligible to go.
That's
worrisome.
That is concerning.
Yes.
I mean, Zion has more time to recover from it than Luke,
Right.
so I'm a little more worried about Luke.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting
Which
to
would
see what they do.
push Justin School into right tackle if necessary.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. All right, it is time for our weekly trivia question.
Yes.
Bree, take it away.
Okay. Last week against Washington, Baker Mayfield compiled a passer rating of 146.4, which is close to the perfect rating of 158.3. 3 quarterbacks have finished a game with a perfect passer rating in Bucs history. How many of them can you name?
I know I can name one. Outside of that, I don't know how confident I am.
Yeah.
And I could probably name 2, but I don't know.
You've seen 2 of them.
Yeah.
The other one was well before your time.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, well, you guys have a chance to figure that out during the course of the show. We'll reveal the answer at the end. No cheating, no Googling. Just use them little brains. That's always our challenge here. We know you guys are honest.
I'll give you a hint. The third quarterback went to the University of Miami.
Oh, okay. I like hints. Hints are good. Okay, so milestone tracker. We always like to do that this time of year as well to make sure we know what guys are aiming for what, so people have something to watch during the rest of the games as well, not just for wins and losses, but guys trying to get certain stats. And per usual,
yeah,
the guy that we're tracking, it's not surprising. It's Milestone Mike.
I promise I will not make this segment about Mike Evans.
I don't think anyone would hate that. I mean, like, I don't think anyone out there is like, I would like to talk less about Mike Evans.
Did you guys see the Kyle Brandt thing
on
Mike Evans?
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Kyle Brandt's take,
love.
look it up on YouTube or Twitter. It's a really interesting take and very positive. Anyway, Mike Evans scored 2 touchdowns in that game.
Let me said it. Mike Evans.
Mike Evans.
Again.
Normal things like that.
Like that. Throwing his hands at the very last minute so the DB doesn't know the ball's coming. That's the key to that play right there. 96 touchdowns. He leapfrogged Devontae Adams, who did not score in Week 1, into 12th place all-time in NFL history, and he's now 4 away from becoming the 11th player in NFL history to get to 100 touchdown receptions. But also, he's now got 590 points in his career. That's second all-time. I mean, he's got all the receiving records. Now he's coming for the kickers. Right? He's like, okay, I'm coming for the kickers now.
That's amazing.
He needs 3 more
which
points.
also, like, the kickers are like, come on, man, this is our one thing. this is what we got.
So Martin Gramatica scored 592 points in his career with the Bucs. That's the all-time franchise record, and Mike is now 590. So what we would really love to see is we get stoned at 4th and 1 at the goal, and they decide to send Mike in. It would be great if he got on a field goal.
Yeah.
Let him kick a field goal and win and get the record that way. But
I feel like I would believe he could do it. You know,
much more likely he scores another touchdown and he's the all-time leader. And the only other all-time leaders on their teams in points scored that are not kickers are Emmitt Smith and Jerry Rice.
Wow, not too shabby. Again, the company.
Emmitt Smith and Jerry Rice.
Not bad company to be keeping. And also, I love that if and when this happens, since Martin Gramatica, I like to cover my bases. When this happens, Martin Gramatica calls the Spanish radio, and we'll get to call his own record getting broken, and I think that's pretty cool. All right, let's talk some fantasy. You kind of teased it earlier. We're going to talk about Mike for milestones. We're probably going to talk about Chris Godwin for fantasy.
So this is mostly a segment where we talk about like what's coming up and try to give advice. But the first thing I'm going to do here is take a victory lap.
Yes, of course.
On Chris Godwin.
Yes.
If anybody,
you earned it.
Hey, I was adamant. Take Chris Godwin. Take him around earlier than he's projected. Make sure you get him because he is going to be a great fantasy player and great value draft-wise compared to where he's supposed to go. And the reasons why I said that all showed up in Week 1. Everybody says he's healthiest he's been since he hurt his knee at the end of 2021. So he can cut off either foot much better than before. B, he's moving back into the slot and he's in a Cooper Kupp type of role. And C, they specifically said, Liam Coen and others specifically said they want to get him more looks in the red zone because he only scored like 5 touchdowns on like 200 catches the last 2 years. That play where he scored was not like Baker going through his reads and then finding Chris. He was the main read. That play was designed for Chris Godwin in the red zone, 1st and goal. This one right here. That was designed for him. And we saw it in training camp, in the joint practices too. They are calling up plays for Chris in the red zone. So if he gets 7, 8 touchdowns and gets 100 catches and you got him in the 7th round,
that's pretty decent. And then also a guy that I think that this is one I've been thinking about preseason of who's going to be interesting from a fantasy standpoint is Bucky Irving, because everyone has, of course, been probably drafting Rashad White for good reason, especially all the catches he makes. We didn't know what Bucky-Rashad duo was going to look like, and I think we still are probably seeing what it'll evolve to over the course of the season. But, man, Bucky made a case for being a fantasy guy, too.
So is Bucky fantasy relevant? That's the question. So he had 76 yards from scrimmage and 2 catches, so that'd be about like in a PPR league, that's 9.6 points, which isn't great. You know, he's probably not a guy you necessarily want to start next week. But the question is, do you want to pick him up? And the short answer is yes. And part of the reason is that if most of the impact fantasy players that you get that weren't drafted are picked up in the first couple weeks. So maybe he's going to get a bigger role as time goes by and be worth starting. So take the risk now, take the gamble, because if you don't pick him up now, you're probably not going to get him because somebody else will.
Yep.
So you don't wait 2-3 weeks to see if he's still going to do it. You pick him up now and hope it works out. So definitely Bucky Irving is fantasy. He should be on all rosters at this point.
Okay, and then now we're going to move into our off-the-field segment, Human Interest. This is where we try to help you guys get to know the team a little bit better off of the field, and I just have one giant shameless plug for this segment today. So we had Baker Mayfield on for our first episode of Bucs Total Access this week, which I am co-hosting with Cam Brate this year, which is so fun. Great to see him back, like, around the building, getting to see the guys. No one doesn't like Cam Brate.
It's 100%.
I would like to start with that. So Baker came on the show with us, and it was phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, go to the Buccaneers YouTube, watch the whole thing. So many interesting football parts, but even more funny personality things, which is what I wanted to tease here. So there's 2 different clips that we're going to show here. One that's a little bit about Baker and some of the guys and the way that they bond together, especially on road trips as we come up on our first one. The other is a bit of a funny Cam Brate story that is going to be relevant for the Lions. So take a look. A little birdie that was walking down the hallway this morning, maybe a big birdie if we're being honest about it, said I should ask you, who's better at Mario Kart?
Tristan said this, didn't he?
Birdie, not so secret. Tristan wanted to know who was better at Mario Kart, you or him?
It pains me to say this. He might be the best Mario Kart player I've ever seen. Wow. It's unbelievable.
He will be shocked you said that. He was like, he won't say me, but he should say me.
Yeah.
Did you ever even try to trash talk, like even once?
I did one time, and
Really?
I still think about it.
I still think about it. It haunts your dreams at night?
So the guy he lives in Tampa.
Oh, well, that was a bad move already.
Yeah, it was to Alex Anzalone, the linebacker who now plays for the Lions. He said something to me, I said something back.
Do we get to know what that was?
No. But then, like, I saw him later, and, like, someone else, like, he had told someone else that I had said something to him. The whole thing is just a nightmare for me, and, yeah, I'm not going to do it ever again in any capacity.
I'll bring it up to him this week.
No, you don't have to.
Cam Brate, #1 tight end in your hearts, last in the league at trash talk, I think is the takeaway. And as we were about to face Alex Anzalone this week, I thought that was very appropriate. And Baker was, I love that about Baker being like, do you want me to say hi to him for you? Do you want me to say anything? Cam's like,
Nah.
No, thank you.
Pass.
We're going to let that die. And I love it. Literally, he tried it once. And Chris Godwin has told me the same thing before, where he tried trash talking once. And he was like, it's just exhausting. He was like, I need my oxygen for other things. Like, I'm tired. I don't want to talk. I don't want to deal with it. So he was like, never mind. And I love it. I just feel like our locker room is so full of these guys that are almost too nice to trash talk, that they're just like,
It doesn't feel natural.
It does, yeah. It doesn't.
other than KJ Britt.
Other than KJ Britt and maybe a little bit of Baker Mayfield, who's still a very nice guy, but has a little bit more of that.
Yes.
That thing you just said about Chris Godwin made me think of something. You just had your shameless plug, so
Yes.
I'll shamelessly plug Salty Dogs.
Yeah.
And that's the podcast. Go look it up. We had Jalen McMillan on as our guest. And when you ask that question, like, hey, you get to be in the same room with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
That would also be cool.
Yeah, Chris Evans. You learn so much from them, but it's always kind of amorphous. Like, what do you actually learn? Mm-hmm. And then Jeff, my co-host, Jeff Ryan, on the show asked him, can you give us a specific, like something that Chris or Mike has taught you? And I saw Jalen kind of start thinking about it. I'm like, oh, we didn't mean to put you on the spot, because that can be a tough question.
Yeah.
You have to come up with something. But then he's like, no, I got something. Chris Godwin has taught him a manner of breathing when he comes to the sideline, because he says, early in camp or early in the offseason, I was like really getting winded, and I'd come to the sideline, I was winded, and he taught me some breathing techniques that have really helped me a lot so I don't get fatigued.
That's fascinating.
Wow.
I mean, you don't normally get that kind of specifics, and that Chris just taught, and that makes sense that Chris would know that.
Yeah, I think Chris is also pretty into mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah.
Would have learned a lot of that stuff, so that's really interesting.
I thought that was very cool.
I like that. That's great. So now let's go ahead and get into this game this next week against the Lions. I've asked everyone I've talked to this week in my interviews about, is this like a revenge game?
Yeah.
Only like one person is just
Yeah,
giving me like
mixed
a
answers.
yes. Everyone loves to be like, oh, no, which I think they're lying. But that's just me. I view it that way. I feel like this is going to be a really fun look at this game that was so fun last year, even though it didn't end the way we wanted. That was a great
the
game.
Atmosphere is.
They're a great team, and I think that it's a fun matchup.
They beat us twice last year.
Yeah.
I would say more than a revenge game, it's a measuring stick game.
Yes,
that's
I think
the way
that's
Baker
fair.
put it.
And I mean, of course, that's going to be tough with all the injuries. It may change a little bit of that measurement
No
stick.
excuses.
No excuses.
Right.
You're right. What am I doing here? All right. So, Scott, tell me what stands out to you about this matchup and maybe one of the Lions' position groups that you're going to be focusing on.
It's that offensive line, that dominant offensive line led by Penei Sewell, but they're good across the board. And they took over that game at the end against San Francisco. That was, was it no, it was the Rams, right?
Yeah.
That was the most entertaining, other than our game, the most entertaining game that I saw this weekend.
Great game.
And it went into overtime. They already were doing a great job running the ball, and David Montgomery just runs so hard. And behind that line, they give him just a little bit, and he just powerful runner. They took over in the overtime period and just ran the ball down the Rams' throat. They really didn't. It wasn't all running. There were a few passes, but they really didn't need to pass the ball. And by the time they got to first and goal or whatever down it was like, well, this is a given. There's no way they're stopping them. And so it was the most expected thing when David Montgomery ran in for the touchdown. And now that line is going against the Bucs defensive line, which would normally say, okay, this is a great marquee matchup because Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Logan Hall, all high draft picks, Will Golston, just a nice defensive front to hold up against them. But you're playing probably, almost certainly without Kalijah, right? Didn't you say that in the injury segment? And Logan Hall has a chance, but not necessarily. So to me, that's a key thing. And one of the defenders was Joe Tryanchenko in the locker room yesterday was asked how important is it to get pressure on him. He goes, well, first of all, we got to stop the run. That's the number one thing that we have to do. And that's not going to be easy, and that could be where this game turns, how well the Bucs can hold up against that incredible offensive line.
And as good as they are in the run game, they have some pretty decent wide receivers.
Yes.
I mean, that's quite a duo out there. And knowing how beat up the Bucs secondary is, I imagine that's going to be a huge part of it.
Well, and just some of their positionless players, and I think that's one of the things that's so hard about the Lions is they have so many weapons on offense that if you game plan for one, well, then somebody else can beat you. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a first-team All-Pro last year. He's a guy that has a variety of releases out of the slot. He kind of does the reverses, the screens, but he's a sudden route runner. He's good on like the two-way go, the option routes, kind of that slot weapon. And then you have a guy like Sam Laporta, who basically took the NFL by storm as a rookie tight end. This is just preposterous to me, but he had 86 receptions and 10 touchdowns. 86 receptions as a rookie tight end. That is the most by that position for a rookie in NFL history. And he's a guy that, again, can do it all. Todd Bowles talked about this a little bit on Bucs Total Access, but he can stretch the field vertically. He has the strength in line for blocking, and then he also has a good feel on routes. He's physical. He has the power to power through the jams, and is kind of that guy that's sort of built with that prerequisite Dan Campbell, Detroit. And then they also have Jameson Williams, who is the deep threat, can beat you over the top. That game-changing long speed that's good on the post routes, the corners. So I think how well the Bucs are able to contain those guys is going to be a key for me.
Yeah, Jameson Williams is the new one there.
I mean, man, he showed out in that game as well. He showed his speed, made some big deep ball threats. I mean, that guy.
And he's good like on an end around too.
Yeah.
Don't forget, they took him 12th overall in 2022, and he was coming off an injury, so he didn't do much as a rookie. And last year was kind of disappointing. There was a little bit, I think a suspension was involved. But this guy could be, I mean, you saw, they have returned pretty much everything they had on offense last year, and then maybe this guy is their breakout this year, and that's a little scary.
Yeah, and looking at their defense, it's funny, I felt like I was almost copy-pasting what I talked about last week with the Commanders of just this overhaul idea of, for the Commanders, it was their whole starting defense almost. This is a little bit more focused on their secondary, but for the second straight year, they're overhauling it, which that's never great. You don't want to have to do that.
It didn't work the year before.
That means they're like, never mind, try it again.
Do it again.
So it's going to be interesting to see what this group looks like this week. For one thing, they traded for our guy Carlton Davis, who everybody's very familiar with. Signed Amik Robertson from the Raiders, drafted Terrion Arnold in the first round. All those guys are starting. And then by putting Robertson in the slot, that's going to let them put Brian Branch back into safety, which is so reminiscent of this Antoine Winfield thing. If you're so good, let's try you also here, and then it's like, no, but you're really good at this safety thing. So Brian Branch looks great. They've got a whole bunch of new guys back there in their secondary. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see how that looks when that was one of their few areas of weakness last year in a very, very good team and a really good roster. That was not their strong suit. So have they improved that this year? And therefore, is that going to make them pretty formidable? All right, so we're going to close now with our answer to the trivia question.
I read that,
Yes,
right?
go ahead.
Why don't you tell us the one and maybe two that you know?
Well, I mean, I knew Baker Mayfield did it because I remembered that
Green
very
Bay.
distinctly in Green Bay. So that one was
Yes.
very easy. And then I'm like, well, it's probably Tom Brady. Like, that also feels like just even
That's
if
correct.
I didn't remember the specific game, it's like how Mike Evans is always your person that you're like, when in doubt. And I was like, I'm going to guess Tom Brady. But yeah, the third one you got me.
Well, so Tom Brady's was against Detroit. Remember the game? He only played the first half, but he did so much. That was like
That's
the
helpful.
47-7 game.
Yeah.
Well, he had enough passing stats that it looked like a
looked-
full game,
yeah.
and it was a perfect game. And then Blaine Gabbert came in, and immediately first pass was a touchdown to.
Amazing.
They were really beat up and hurt by COVID in that game. But
Yeah.
Anyway. I didn't bring that up because we're playing Detroit. That's a very different
handy.
team. That 2020 team,
Very
I
different.
just realized that. I didn't do that on purpose. That 2020 team at the end of 2020, they had coaches and players
Out.
by the
Yes.
dozens
Yeah.
out due to injuries and COVID.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't a fair fight. And the Buccaneers are going to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The third one, I threw out that hint that it's a guy from Miami. I was kind of trying to be misleading because most
You would give a hint that's misleading. That's not the point of a hint, Scott.
Most Buccaneer fans, when they think Miami quarterback, would think Vinny Testaverde because we spent the first overall pick on him in 1987 out of the University of Miami, that famous brash Miami team. But no, it's Craig Erickson. Craig Erickson in 1994 against Indianapolis.
Wow.
But he was the first one to ever do it, and nobody did it again for 26 years.
Wow.
But we've had two in the last 3 years.
Look at
so.
your little trickery in there on your trivia
Gotcha.
question. I like that.
You don't want to make
All
it
right.
easy.
You do. You can't make it too easy. All right, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider. Thank you so much for being with us. Enjoy that game against the Lions this weekend. We'll see you next week.